ไปตัวยิง
I'll be right back.
ไปตัวใกล้รถโทรลีเขายิงตรงเลย
Wow, we.
Hả?
Đi xa cho con nhớ lúc tí nữa à.
Nhớ lúc coi, nhớ lúc coi sao lại. Người học với tôi gì lúc làm trồng Anchorage nữa.
My name is Ty, and I'm going to be your guys' tour guide today. Just a little bit about myself before we start the tour. I am a lifelong Alaskan. So raise your hand if you guys have heard of the Kodiak bears. Right, most of you guys, one of the largest species of bear in the entire world, only found right here in Alaska on the island of Kodiak. And that's where I was born and raised. So I was born and raised on Kodiak Island, which is south of Anchorage, about a 45-minute flight, and just a little over 250 miles, the second largest island in all of the United States. About 4 years ago, moved up here to Anchorage, and I've loved it up here ever since, although I will say it's a little bit different than Kodiak. The city of Kodiak has a population of about 6,000 people. Here in Anchorage, this is the largest city in Alaska with a population of about 270,000. So going from 6,000 to 270,000 has been a little bit of a change. There's a lot more to do, a bunch of different things to do. People like to say that the best thing about living in Anchorage is you're only a 30-minute drive from Alaska. A little bit different than the rest of the state is what I'm trying to say, but that's why I love it. On the weekend, you can go to one of our historical bars here in downtown Anchorage, and the next day go for a beautiful hike in the Chugach Range. It's a nice mixture. We're going to be learning a lot more about Anchorage, so if you guys have any questions throughout the entire tour, please don't worry about raising your hand. Don't worry about interrupting me. You guys can just say, "Hey Ty, ask your question," and then I'll answer to the best of my knowledge. And if I don't know the answer to a question, I will just say that. I'm a horrible liar. Alright, it keeps me honest. Get too nervous, start talking a little too fast. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say so. If I have an answer or an idea what the answer might be, I'll let you know that as well. So any question, any moment, just yell it out. I want to give you guys the best information possible. Do you guys have any questions before we get started? Go ahead.
What kind of a job do the people in Anchorage do?
Well, here in Anchorage, it's Anchorage with being the largest city, it's going to make, there's a lot of jobs that are very similar to any other large city in the U.S., but just generally, across Alaska, the top three largest parts of our economy here in Alaska, that means also, what most people are going to be working in. Number one is oil. So oil is the largest part of our state. About 85% of our state's annual budget is made up of oil revenues. Number two is tourism. So there's a lot of people that work in tourism. And then also number three is commercial fishing. So commercial fishing is the third largest part of our state. Those are going to be the top three largest parts of our state. And Anchorage is going to be a little bit different. But just generally, you can expect people in Alaska, those are going to be the three industries that they're working in the most. And we also do rely on a lot of seasonal workers to come up here for the summertime, specifically for our commercial fishing and our tourism. Yeah. All right, so we're going to get started. Right now we are on East Street. Directly behind us is 4th Avenue. 4th Avenue is one of the most famous streets here in downtown Anchorage, and a big reason for that. One block down off to your right side on 4th Avenue and D Street is where each year we start our annual Iditarod sled dog race. The Iditarod starts right back there on 4th Avenue and D Street in the month of February with our Anchorage ceremonial start. Then those mushers, their dogs, their gear, after that 10-mile ceremonial start to kick off the race in the largest city in Alaska, those mushers, their dogs, their gear will then load up into trucks, drive about an hour-and-a-half drive north to Willow, Alaska for the race's official restart. And then following that restart in Willow, Alaska, we'll go about 1,000 miles north to Nome, Alaska for the race's end. So 1,000-mile race every single year since 1973, and this year's winner, Jesse Holmes, finished that race in about 9 days, 7 hours. So 9 days, 7 hours, 1,000 miles, we do that race every single year. A real quick show of hands if you watched the show Life Below Zero. All right, we got one of you guys. So you're familiar with Jesse Holmes, right? Yeah. Jesse Holmes was on that TV show, Life Below Zero, one of those Alaskan TV shows. Now he does that Iditarod every single year. He's won it 2 years in a row. But that's originally what he was known for. And I recommend if you're looking for a time to come up to Alaska during the winter time, and I know some of you guys are going to start shaking your heads, February is a good time to do so, to come see that Iditarod race start, and then you can make your way up to Nome for the race's end. During that time, try to see the Northern Lights. That's what I would recommend. Off to your left side is our Alaska Railroad Depot, and about the Alaska Railroad, Anchorage and the entire state of Alaska would not be what it is today. And that's because in the early 1900s, giant coal deposits were found all over the surrounding areas of Anchorage, and we had eager buyers ready to buy that coal in different countries in Asia, specifically South Korea. But we had one problem. How do we move it? The logical solution is to load up all that coal onto a barge and ship it straight out of the port of Alaska here in Anchorage. However, here in Anchorage, we actually have the second largest tide differential out of anywhere in North America, second only to the Bay of Fundy in Canada. Here in Anchorage, from low tide to high tide on the most extreme day is a 40-foot tide differential. On average, it's 22 feet, but 40 feet on the most extreme day. That large tide differential at the time made it extremely difficult to ship that coal out of our port. So all of that coal would have to be shipped out of the second closest deep water port in Seward, Alaska, 118 miles away. We needed a railroad. Two companies would come up to Alaska and try to build that railroad, but both of those companies quickly found out that building a railroad in Alaska in the early 1900s was not just extremely difficult, it was extremely expensive. So both of those companies went bankrupt. And then in 1921, the federal government came up here to the territory of Alaska, lent us some hands, lent us some money, and helped us complete that railroad in 2 years after their arrival. So by 1923, the railroad was originally completed. We were able to ship coal out of Seward. It's been expanded since, and it's a very big part of our state. As we're heading up this hill, off to your right side, behind the railroad depot, all of this flat land that you're going to see to your right side is actually the original town site of Anchorage. So when that railroad was being completed, there was about 2,000 men and 1,000 insulated army tents all spread throughout this land. And that gave us our name, before we were Anchorage, of Tent City. Not the most creative name, right? 2,000 men, 1,000 tents, Tent City, but that was our name. And after that railroad was complete, 600 men stayed behind and decided to live in Tent City. And with those men staying behind, their families began to move out. And these families, they hated the name Tent City. So we had a vote to officially name our city. The top 3 names that were on that ballot were Alaska City, Tent City, and Anchorage. And Anchorage came in a distant 3rd place. Anchorage lost that vote. The name that we chose for our city was Alaska City, Alaska. Once again, not going with a creative choice, but with this exciting news, we contacted the Seattle Postmaster because all of our mail was going through Seattle at the time since we were still a territory, and they needed an official name to send all of our mail to. So we told that Seattle Postmaster, hey, we are an official city. We have a real name. We are Alaska City, Alaska. And about 2 weeks later, we received a telegram back from that Seattle Postmaster, and he said, you guys can call yourself whatever you want. We've been calling you Anchorage officially for the past year. Your name is Anchorage. And we said, our name is Anchorage. Officially chosen by the United States Postal Service. And the name Anchorage comes from the fact that those large ships carrying construction supplies could not port here. Instead, they had to anchor out in the Cook Inlet when we were building the railroad, use smaller those supplies. This was their Anchorage. It's a very simple name. Off to your right side is the Pacific Ocean, specifically the Cook Inlet, named after Captain James Cook, whose statue you'll see off to your right side, overlooking his namesake. We're going to be brief and be passing it. There's Captain James Cook. Now, Captain James Cook was a famed British explorer who in July of 1776 was commissioned to find a shorter trade route between England and India, specifically a river through the Northwest Passage. Captain James Cook and his crew made their way up here into this inlet in July of 1778. And when they got up here, they noticed 2 distinct bodies of water within that inlet. that extended it to the north and extended it to the south. And we now know those two bodies of water today as the Caij Arm and the Turnagain Arm. First, they sailed up the Caij Arm, looking for that river through the Northwest Passage, and as they found it was a dead end, turned around. They then sailed down the Turnagain Arm, and as they found once more it wasn't what they were looking for, Captain Cook wrote down in his journal, "I fear again, for once more I must turn again." And that is how we got the name Turn Again Arm, because they had to turn again. And look, I promise you, this tour is not all going to be about names. I really just wanted to hammer in the point that early in Alaska's history, we had no idea how to name things. Time after time, the first thing that comes to mind, we save our energy for elsewhere. Now, something I wanted to mention in relation to the oil, and oil being the largest part of our state here, the largest part of our economy here in the state of Alaska. Each year, every Alaska resident gets the annual Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend. So the PFD is a check that each Alaska resident gets just for living here in Alaska. It's a kickback from those oil revenues, and that check will come to Alaska residents during the fall time. And this year, it's been agreed to be $1,000, which is actually the lowest that it's been for the last couple of years. But $1,000 each Alaska resident gets for living here in the state because of oil.
Hi.
Yeah.
How long do you have to be a resident before you get that?
Well, you just have to be a resident. So how long it takes to be a resident, I believe it's 6 months with a permanent address. It might be a little bit longer than that, maybe 12 months. But yeah, come on. This street we just moved past is 9th Avenue. 9th Avenue in 1919 was our city limits. Everything past 9th Avenue was all forest. All until 1920 when we cut down a section of that forest, and off to your right and off to your left, 1 block wide and 14 blocks long, is our Delaney Park Strip. Now originally, this park strip was intended to be used as a fire buffer zone to prevent any forest fires from the south of our city from burning down our entirely wooden-built city of Anchorage to the north. What they did not intend on were Alaskan pilots using that space as their very own downtown runway. Golfers had another idea. Golfers in Alaska at that time saw that space as their very own downtown golf course. So imagine that at one point in time, Delaney Park Strip was both used as a runway and a golf course at the exact same time. A very short period of time. Because pilots were actually the ones who started to get really annoyed. Because what's more fun than flying a plane? Trying to get a hole in one. Thank you guys, I'll be here all week. Thank you. You know, the correct response would have been to sigh or boo at that joke. I don't think I had anybody laugh, which I'm proud of you guys for not giving it. If you laughed at that joke, I wouldn't have been able to trust you for the rest of the tour. As we're heading up this hill, to your right and to your left side, these two separate bodies of water, this area is known as West Chester Lagoon. Beautiful area to go on runs, walks, bikes, as well as birding. If you want to add some new birds to your life list, check out West Chester Lagoon. At the top of this hill is West Anchorage High School. And West Anchorage High School was the very first modern public high school to open up their doors here in Anchorage, opening up their doors in 1953. Today, West Anchorage High School is the largest high school that we have here in Anchorage, and last time I checked, their student enrollment was just above 1,700. It's a pretty good sized school, 1,700 students, and that eagle mural on the side of the building is my favorite part. That eagle mural was commissioned by the graduating class of 1971, and that graduating class of 1971, they went to the principal with this idea, and he said, great. But when they asked to include the number 71 somewhere on that mural to give their class some credit for fundraising all the money needed for the mural, he said no. But what happens when you tell a bunch of high schoolers not to do something? They're going to do it anyway.
They find a way.
So they went to that mural artist and they had him secretly include the number 71 somewhere in that mural. See, maybe a few of you guys have already found it. Keep looking, you'll find it. Alright, I've let you struggle enough. If you look here to the front of the trolley, I have a little physical diagram for our visual learners. So right up here at the front of the trolley, 7-1. It's the same color as the background of the wall itself. And don't worry if it took you a few seconds, even if you're still looking for it. Because it took the principal 4 years before he noticed. And he was furious. But those kids were long gone by then. 4 years later, they were getting ready to graduate college. So he waited to get his revenge. And at the graduating class of 1971's 10-year class reunion, that principal stood out at that front entrance, and as those former students entered, he handed them detention slips. Finally, getting them back all those years later. And look, he had a good sense of humor. Those detention slips turned out to be free drink tickets to one of the local bars. So he wanted to get them back in a fun way and let them know that he knew 4 years later. Now, before I continue talking about the school, I wanted to point out, as we're driving, to your right side, you're going to see some trees that have been stripped of the bark. Any of those trees that you see that have been stripped of their bark all throughout Anchorage is a result of moose. During the spring and the wintertime, moose will go up to these trees, strip the bark off of them, and that's how they eat during the spring and winter, besides eating branches and twigs, after switching over to leafy green vegetation during the summer. West Anchorage High School has a lot of history to do with the 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake. And I'm sure some of you guys have heard of that earthquake, but just to review, that 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake struck on March 27, 1964, 5:36 p.m. at a 9.2 magnitude, lasting over 4 minutes and 30 seconds. There was actually a basketball game scheduled to be going on in West High's gymnasium at the exact same time of that earthquake. A gymnasium that would entirely collapse. However, a few months prior, concerned mothers had gone to the principal and begged him to have a basketball game on that day. And that's not because they knew this earthquake was coming, it's because that day was Good Friday. It was a religious holiday. These mothers wanted their sons in church instead of in that gym playing basketball all that day. So they went to the principal, had that game rescheduled, and instead of an entire gym filled with hundreds of students and parents cheering on their home team, that gym was entirely empty when it collapsed, and nobody was harmed. And that's not to say that the churches themselves were undamaged, but rather that gymnasium collapsing on hundreds of people would have been the deadliest area in Anchorage that night. As we're making this turn, all throughout this neighborhood, you guys are going to notice all of these fenced-in trees. And all these fenced-in trees that you're going to see to your right side, you'll see them up here to your left, are fenced in to protect them from moose. If you don't wrap up your trees, those moose will destroy your trees over time, either biting the leaves off, biting the branches, or later in the summer, going into the fall time, moose love crab apples. So a lot of those trees you saw back there are crab apple trees. And if you don't wrap up those crab apple trees, those moose will bite those crab apples right off the branch, just destroy your tree over time. About 15 years ago, there was one moose who loved crab apples so much that he'd go all throughout this neighborhood. He was notorious for doing so, eating up as many crab apples as he possibly could all throughout the way. This wasn't too much of a problem until the late fall time, when all of those crab apples began to ferment. Can anybody tell me what happens to a fruit when it ferments? You get alcohol. That moose ate so many of those fermented, alcohol-infused crab apples that he earned himself the nickname Buzzwinkle. Buzzwinkle Moose, that's the name they gave him. And Buzzwinkle wasn't a bad guy, but he was a big, dizzy mess who loved to knock into people's houses, taking souvenirs along the way. This is a true story. If you Google Buzzwinkle the Moose, Anchorage, Alaska, you can find a photo of Mr. Buzzwinkle stumbling down the street with Christmas lights wrapped around both sides of his antlers. That is a real photo that you can find online, Buzzwinkle the Moose. Also in Buzzwinkle's neighborhood is one of my favorite homes in all of Anchorage, the Isaac's home. Can you guys see this 3-story house off to your right side? And if you're having a little bit of trouble, it's because all 3 stories are underground. So this right here is Anchorage's underground home. That front lawn you see is actually their roof. Those 2 skylights go directly down into their kitchen and living room. That covered walkway goes 14 steps down right to their main entrance, and the whole house is actually built on a hill. The entire backside's made of mostly glass. They have a beautiful backyard as well. What I love most about this home is that during the dead of winter, our most freezing temperatures, they have the cheapest heating bill out of any home in this entire neighborhood. Because since this home is underground, all of that excess heat has a lot less places to escape to, and it stays well insulated by the surrounding earth. Then for any heating they do need, they utilize geothermal heating. It's a very cheaply heated home. Besides that point, this driveway is also completely heated as well. And having a heated driveway in Alaska is what a lot of people like to call cheating. I call them jealous. So am I. Now, where did Mr. and Mrs. Isaacs get the idea for this underground home here in Alaska? Well, Mr. and Mrs. Isaacs moved up to Alaska during the 1970s, and they did what everybody else did at the time. They hired a real estate agent to show them all the different houses and all the different plots of land to buy. And then they came across that plot of land right back there. And at the time, all it was a hill. There was no home, no structures built on it. Mr. Isaacs turned and looked at that real estate agent and said, "Why are you even showing me this? All it is a hill. It's too narrow to build a traditional home on." That right there is a sucker's law. Later that week, Mr. and Mrs. Isaacs went on a date to the Anchorage Museum. And at the Anchorage Museum, they learned about all of the different Alaskan native tribes that call this state their home. Two of those tribes, the Aleut and the Alutiiq, utilized underground homes. What they would call those homes were a barah. So what these tribes would do is they would dig a big hole in the ground, fill it with the skeletal frame of a whale, bind the rib cages together, mount dirt over top, and then build tunnels to enter their homes. And that's how these tribes stayed so warm during freezing temperatures and up to 100-mile-per-hour winds. Down on the Aleutian chain, that chain of islands that extends to the west of our state. Mr. and Mrs. Isaacs were extremely inspired by those tribes. So they went back to that sucker's law. And with the help of an architect friend, were able to design that home to go with the contours of the land. Now it sits as Anchorage's very own barah. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that home, after the tour is done, if you go online and you search up Anchorage Underground Home, you can find a few different articles where they interview that couple, talk a little bit more about building that home, living in that home, and then some more photos of the backside of the home to give you a better idea about what the whole thing looks like. One of my favorite homes in all of Anchorage. And if you're willing to learn more about different Alaska Native tribes here in the state of Alaska, and I highly recommend doing so, check out the Alaska Native Heritage Center. The Alaska Native Heritage Center has a bountiful amount of information and also some recreations of traditional Alaska Native homes. And then also, the Anchorage Museum on 6th Avenue and C Street has a bunch of different displays related to local Alaskan artists, Alaskan history, in relation to the earthquake, state foundation, and a bunch of other things, and then also different Alaska Native tribes. So check out the Anchorage Museum and the Alaska Native Heritage Center. Right now, we're going to be heading out to Earthquake Park. Earthquake Park was the residential area of Anchorage that was hit the hardest that night of that 1964 earthquake. But before we get out to Earthquake Park, I'd like to talk to you guys about Valdez, Alaska, what happened to Valdez during that earthquake. And if the name Valdez rings a bell, likely because of that 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill, one of the worst oil spills in North American history. I'll be talking about the city of Valdez, which is southeast of Anchorage, about 175 miles that the ship, the Exxon Valdez, was named after. So when the city of Valdez was originally being built, it was the very back corner of the bay, right by the water. Fast forward to that 1964 earthquake, that 9.2 earthquake caused an underwater landslide right there in that bay. That underwater landslide caused two giant tsunami waves to head directly for their town. There was actually tons of people out on the docks in Valdez at the time of that earthquake, excited, waiting, because a big barge, a big ship, was coming into their town that day with their weekly shipment of groceries, which is how a lot of isolated coastal communities in Alaska get their goods, get their groceries. It's a big barge coming in, dropping it off. This was that day. An exciting day. All until those two waves hit their city, basically destroying it. When a boat was finally able to make it out there into that bay, the only words that you could hear from that boat's emergency broadcast channel were, "Mayday, Mayday, this is the boat of us in China calling anyone. Valdez is gone, Valdez is gone." And out of all the people who lost their lives as a result of that earthquake and the following tsunamis across all areas affected, about 70% of all those lost lives were right there in Valdez and the surrounding villages. And other area. So although the earthquake itself was extraordinarily destructive, those tsunami waves that followed were by far the most deadly. So right now we're going to be entering Earthquake Park. And Earthquake Park was the residential area of Anchorage that was hit the hardest that night on that 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake. And that's because before this was a park, before this was a forest, this used to be a neighborhood. A very, very high-class neighborhood. 75 homes used to stand out here where the park sits today. This was a single subdivision completely wiped out. That forest that you see below us to your right side used to be completely level with the parking lot that we're currently on right now. You might also be able to see these little rolling hills that go down through the forest. Those rolling hills are basically seismic waves frozen in time from that 1964 earthquake, showing you how the land was moving. Now let's talk a little bit about the science behind that earthquake. So the North American tectonic plate was of the Pacific tectonic plate, and it still is, colliding, so subducting one another. The best way to imagine this earthquake is like a spring being tightened more and more and more. Well, eventually you can only tighten that spring so much before it breaks, and all of that built-up pressure gets released. And that's exactly what happened with the North American tectonic plate and the Pacific tectonic plate colliding, building up that pressure, releasing it, causing that 9.2 megathrust earthquake. But something else happened in this neighborhood specifically. This neighborhood was built on a liquefaction zone. What that means is that because of that shaking, the clay in the ground beneath those homes began to liquefy. It's called liquefaction. For over 4 minutes and 30 seconds, 75 homes, not just shaking, but also sinking and sliding in the liquefied clay beneath them. And some of those homes went directly out into the ocean, which we're currently about a half a mile from right now. 75 homes either partially or fully destroyed. But only 4 people lost their lives in this neighborhood. How's that possible? There's a couple of different reasons. Part of the reason does have to do with the day that it was. As I mentioned earlier, it was Good Friday. A lot of these families were not home at the time of that earthquake. They were further inland at church, away from this liquefaction zone that got hit the hardest. But what about the rest of the families that were home? Alright, it was 5:36 p.m. These families were just getting ready to have dinner. About 30 seconds into that earthquake, some homes were so crooked after being shaken so violently, families couldn't even open up their front doors to escape their houses, instead having to jump out through their windows and rush to safety. But in this moment, neighbors did not abandon each other. Instead, neighbors rallied together, going house to house, alerting as much people as possible, grabbing children, forming human rescue lines, and pulling up people one by one, completely sacrificing their own safety in order to ensure the safety of as many people around them as possible. So it's a combination of not just the day that it was, but also the way that those neighbors reacted in that moment, that only 4 out of the 9 lives lost here in Anchorage were in this neighborhood. As I said, 9 lives lost here in Anchorage, that is relatively low. And there's a couple different reasons. Back in 1964, the population of the city of Anchorage was 100,000 people. Still, 9 lives lost for 100,000 people is low, because Anchorage is not a densely populated city. We're very far spread out. We don't have a big city center where everybody lives, and big buildings can collapse, killing hundreds. One of the reasons. The other reason is, although Anchorage is next to the ocean, we do not face the direct open ocean, which means we are not at risk for tsunami waves. So we don't have to worry about tsunami waves here in the city of Anchorage, although we did receive some tidal surges that substantially raised water levels. That's not something we got to worry about. So, no tsunami waves, not a high population density, 2 of the main reasons why Anchorage as a city only lost 9 lives. After that earthquake happened, scientists came up to Alaska to conduct core samples of the earth. And through those core samples, they were able to find that these type of megathrust earthquakes happen about once every 630 years. But that's specifically for those type of mega thrust earthquakes, which is what that earthquake was classified as. Throughout the entire state of Alaska, in a single day at a maximum, we can have up to 100 earthquakes throughout our entire state in a single day. But there's a few things you gotta remember. Alaska is a giant state. There's a lot of land and sea for those earthquakes to be happening. And the majority of earthquakes that we experience are extremely low in magnitude, to the point where you're not going to be able to feel them. They're not going to cause any significant damage. But every once in a while, we do get those larger earthquakes that will cause damage and be worrisome for our coastal communities who have to worry about tsunami waves. Now, as we're making this turn, you're going to see up here on your right side this part of the fence that sticks out towards the road. That right there up here to your right side is known as a moose gate. This moose gate specifically acts as a one-way gate to allow moose into this large forested area, but that doesn't allow them to come back out because they get hit on the head with those thick metal wires. It's like a crab pot, but for moose. And look, those moose are not trapped. Wherever you see a moose gate, they can go a couple miles one way and get out, a couple miles the other way and get out. It's purely a safety measure to keep moose off of our main busy roads and funnel them into these large forested areas. And moose will learn where those gates are and then adjust their movement accordingly. So they do help minimize the amount of vehicle collisions that we experience each year throughout the entire state of Alaska. Although I will say that moose gate back there that we just saw, a little bit useless, because in about 15 seconds we're going to see a wide open gate to your right side that they can go either direction. So those gates are how they're supposed to work. You'll see them all throughout the entire state. That one back there specifically, a little out of order. You can go in right there. Now, throughout the entire state of Alaska, we have about 150 to 175,000 moose in total. That's compared to a statewide population, or a city of Anchorage population of about 1,200 moose. So 1,200 moose here in the city of Anchorage, 150 to 175,000 moose throughout the entire state of Alaska. We have about one moose for every 4 people. That means we've got a lot of moose and we don't got very many people. And right now is the most dangerous time to run into a moose, because it is calving season. Calving season is the time of year in which pregnant cow moose, pregnant female moose are giving birth to their babies. Which means you run into a mama moose with 2 newborn calves. You gotta be careful, keep your distance. Each year throughout the entire state of Alaska, there are more moose attacks than there are bear attacks. Get it? We do have more moose than we have bears. In my opinion, that just means you're more likely to run into something that's gonna attack you. So if you see a moose here in Anchorage, just keep your distance. People will oftentimes get way too close, putting themselves in danger, especially those mama moose who are already on edge trying to protect their babies. Now, you can call in a moose, maybe not right now after telling you that they're the most dangerous animal in the state. But moose calls will be used during the fall time, typically by hunters or photographers when moose are in their mating season. So even if you do one of these calls at a moose this time of year, they're probably going to be wondering why you're calling about 4 months early. First we have the cow moose call, the female moose. And this is what the cow moose call sounds like. Listen closely. It's okay to laugh. That is the cow moose call, the female moose. Majestic, right? I like to say that call sounds somewhere in between an airplane engine, a lawnmower, a ghost, an ambulance, and a Wookiee. That is the female moose call. That's what they sound like. Next we have the bull moose call, the male moose. This is what the bull moose call sounds like. Just a little bit different. I like to call that one cat puking. That is the bull moose call. So you guys are ready to head off onto our Anchorage trails, making those sounds as you go along. You'll fit right in. We're going to be entering the Lake Hood Seaplane Base. This is the largest and busiest seaplane base in the entire world. Throughout this entire Lake Hood Seaplane Base area, there's about 1,200 planes in total. Any plane that you're going to see out there on the lake are all on floats. In some other areas you might call them pontoons. Here in Alaska we typically call them floats, refer to those planes as either float planes or seaplanes. And they are what we use to take off and land all throughout the entire state, from lakes, rivers that are wide enough, and ocean. On a peak summer day, up to 300 takeoffs and landings can happen out here at the Lake Hood Seaplane Base. 300 on a peak summer day. There's a reason that it's the largest and the busiest. But we don't stop flying during the winter time. During the wintertime, a lot of these pilots will switch over from floats to skis, specifically hydraulic skis, that will be typically attached to tires to be lifted up and down to choose between using the skis or the tires, and then using those skis to take off and land directly from the frozen lake. We fly all year round. We're going to get an example of what those skis look like here in just a second. I'll make sure to point them out. The only time that we're not utilizing the lake for flying is in between seasons when the lake is melting or freezing, but otherwise we're out here flying. And this lake was still frozen enough for these planes to be utilized using skis about a month and a half ago. Up here on your right side, that yellow and black plane, that is a de Havilland Otter, one of the larger planes that you'll see on this entire lake, made by a Canadian company. There's the largest skis that you'll see.
Ty, do you have a pilot's license?
I don't have my pilot's license, but here in Alaska, if you were to ask me if I fly planes, it's a different question. I'm trying to say we have a lot of unlicensed pilots. I'm not one of them, at least officially. No, I don't have my pilot's license, and I don't fly planes. But yeah, those are two different questions in the state of Alaska. And you can get your pilot's license at 13 to fly with somebody else, and then you can fly solo at 16. So it's about 1 out of every 70 Alaskans are a licensed pilot. That is the most licensed pilots per capita out of any state in the United States. And if there was a way to count it, I'm sure we'd have the most unlicensed pilots as well. To your left side, we also have a gravel runway, so 2 separate waterways that these planes can taxi between. 1 gravel runway, 3 different areas that these planes are taking off and landing at different times of the year. There's some more skis to your right side, so you can see what they look like in smaller capacities. But yeah, we really do fly all year round. You're going to see some of these planes that have these big, large tires. Some of the large tires that you're going to see on these planes are known as tundra tires, like this one to your right side, and this other one to your right side, and that one up there. Those large tires, those tundra tires, are large tires that have been inflated at a low PSI, which allow them to absorb a lot of pressure upon impact, which is especially useful for taking that pressure off of the body of your plane and having it damaged over time, especially when landing in rough terrain around different parts of Alaska. So we've got tundra tires, we have skis that are attached to tires, we have floats. Some of those floats also have deployable wheels that they can choose between landing on a runway or landing on the water. Those are kind of the main landing gear that you'll see out here. And off to your right side, way off in the distance, you'll see that big air traffic control tower. That air traffic control tower that you see off in the distance is the main air traffic control tower that facilitates operations at our Ted Stevens International Airport and the Lake Hood Seaplane Base. It's shared between the two. So not only are they facilitating operations at the largest and busiest seaplane base in the entire world, but our Ted Stevens International Airport here in Anchorage, our main airport here in Anchorage, is actually the 4th busiest cargo airport in the entire world. And it used to be number 3 a couple of years ago, but now number 4, 4th busiest cargo airport in the entire world. The other top 3 that are on that list, number 1 is Hong Kong International Airport in China. Number 2 is Shanghai International Airport, also in China. Number 3 is Memphis Airport in Tennessee. And those are the top 4 busiest cargo airports in the entire world. The reason why Memphis is on that list is because of FedEx. Right now we're pulled over to check out a couple different mountain ranges. To your right side, way off in the distance, you can see that further away mountain range. That further mountain range is known as the Kenai Range. That's Kenai, Kenai Range down on the Kenai Peninsula. And then this closer mountain range that we have here is the Chugach Range. So Chugach, Chugach. And Chugach is an Athabascan word, one of the Alaska Native languages, that means rainmaker. So Chugach, rainmaker. Now real quick, does anybody have any questions that they haven't had a chance to ask at some point? Could be about anything.
Is the snow always on the mountains?
Not always. So there will be a time of the year where the snow will melt away just in time for it to start snowing again. And that won't be here for another few months before they're fully melted away. And when I say fully, it's barely fully. It kind of depend on the year as well. And there's some beautiful hikes up in that mountain range. the most the most popular here in Anchorage, if you guys scan those peaks, you can see that there's one that has a very distinct flat top about midway through the part of the range that we can see. I'm sure you could guess the name of that mountain. Flat Top, yeah. It's Flat Top Mountain. So Flat Top Mountain, one of the most popular hikes here around the Anchorage area. You'll see some houses that are up there on the hillside as well. It's called the Hillside Neighborhood. Very simple. Yeah, any other questions? It can be about anything. It can also be about nothing.
Can you fish in this lake?
So no, you're not allowed to. There are some small fish in here, but you're not allowed to fish. All around the lake, you'll see active aerodrome, keep off lake, and they'll have signs that say no fishing, no skating, nothing else. It's only for the purpose of these planes taking off and landing. But last week on a tour, I did see somebody breaking the law of fishing right off the side of it. So you'll have people who maybe don't know or don't care that'll try to fish. But it's not the best fishing either, so I don't know how you would. Yeah, but so yeah, no fishing allowed. Some people do it. And if you mix the fishing with the plane, then it's fly fishing. As a child, that's what I thought it was. I thought fly fishing meant that you were fishing from a plane. It's a joke based in reality. All year around the lake, 95% of these planes are privately owned planes. So these are planes that are owned by everyday Alaskans who want to be able to own their own plane, fly it wherever they want to go fishing, hunting, just go flying, or oftentimes visit remote property that they might own somewhere else in Alaska. What a plane means to you depends on where in Alaska you're living, and it does vary the use of these planes from pilot to pilot. Here in Anchorage, it's going to be a lot more so for recreational purposes than anything else, really. Although it does depend, you'll have some people that they have it out of necessity. But typically here in Anchorage, you'll have these pilots who fly these planes to either go fishing, hunting, just go flying, or oftentimes visit remote property that they might own somewhere else in Alaska. Then the other 5% of planes are owned by different businesses for commercial purposes, such as tours or transportation to remote locations, lots of times of fishermen or hunters. But owning a plane in rural parts of Alaska, out of necessity, might be the only way that you're actually able to get in and out of that part of the state. Because throughout the entire state of Alaska, we have over 665,000 square miles of land, but we only have about 16,000 miles of drivable road. And what we do have an abundance of are lakes. A lot of lakes. And I'm sure some of you guys have probably been conditioned by the state of Minnesota to think that they have the most lakes. You know, when you call yourself the land of 10,000 lakes, is really just kind of crown yourself. I'm pretty sure Wisconsin and Michigan both have more lakes than Minnesota does. Here in the state of Alaska, we have the most lakes out of any state in the U.S. Over 3 million naturally formed lakes throughout the entire state. And not all of these lakes are going to be large enough for some of those planes to fly on, which is why people like to have those smaller 2-person, 1 pilot, 1 passenger planes that allow you to take off and land in a lot more areas than those big planes are able to. But still, over 3 million naturally formed lakes, but only 16,000 miles of road for that much land. It makes sense why people want to be pilots, especially flying those float-equipped planes to take off and land almost anywhere in the state. And those planes are going to vary in how much they're going to cost. Out there on the Lake Hood Seaplane Base, you could have a $50,000 plane right next to a $500,000 plane, right next to a $1.2 million plane. It's just like cars and boats. How much a car or boat costs, it's going to vary on the model. But still, to park your plane out there on the lake itself, well, the lake is owned and operated by the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska will lease out those individual slips to these pilots to park their plane.